Thank you. Alida Skold. Infrastructure is critical to economic growth, but the aging U.S. transportation system suffers from insufficient investment. 1 in 9 U.S. bridges are structurally deficient, and the American Society of Civil Engineers has awarded overall grades of D or D+ for our U.S. infrastructure in all 5 report cards issued from 1998 to 2013. How do you plan to address the issues with the U.S. infrastructure?
That is a very important issue that our country is facing. That's one of the things that I came back to this country knowing that we need to do better in order to remain competitive. It's for our safety as well as our ability to be productive and competitive. If we have a Department of Infrastructure that envelopes the Department of Transportation and all the other areas that have a part in establishing and planning infrastructure, if we bring it all under one umbrella, Department of Infrastructure, we can have a cohesive plan. And then if we have an infrastructure bank, we can fund that cohesive plan. And that's how it will work. So if you have infrastructure that is 21st century infrastructure, you can you can create jobs, increase productivity and standard of living, and you can decrease carbon pollution. So with infrastructure, we need to have a new power grid as well that moves away from fossil fuels toward renewables. Again, if you have an infrastructure bank, you can fund some of these. And through the infrastructure bank of 3 Ps, public-private partnership funding, as well as you can capture revenues, tax revenues that are lost into the private sector because they're investing into the infrastructure. You can capture that and it goes right back into the public. The gas tax, the 5 cents per gallon that we just had, that's great, we needed that, but who's affected by that? It's the lower income people who cannot buy the electric cars. And so we are now taxing the lower income further than we are the higher income people, and they're the ones who are more capable of paying for this. So we also have to look at a VMT tax, a vehicle mile tax. And that would make it more fair and equitable, and we would have more revenue to create better infrastructure. We can also have foreign direct investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to you, Santiago Ramos. How would you address the U.S. infrastructure problems?
Those are big problems. We can go back to the bridge that fell in Skagit County and realize how our infrastructure is deteriorating. I don't agree with adding more layers to the federal government to try to deal with this issue. I think the Department of Transportation needs to deal with it directly. We need to give them more funding, and that means adding another revenue source. And we can also get it, if we pay down the national debt, we can save our interest and start paying for this, for the other programs that we need. I don't want to increase tolls or anything else, because that affects the working class. It affects a lot of you here have to commute, and that is, you have a set budget, and by adding tolls, that's not the way to do it. We need to get a fair tax system that it taxes the wealthy who can afford it. I also, don't believe in the mileage program, because it affects people who commute longer distances, because they can't afford a house in the city. They have to commute longer. So I believe that we need to focus on, like President Eisenhower did in the 1950s, and just reinvest in our infrastructure.
Excuse me. My opponent referred to something I said. I'd like to have a chance to rebut.
Okay.
So the Department of Transportation would not be another layer. It would be taking something that we already have, the Department of Transportation, and increasing its ability to develop cohesive plans. The Department of Commerce, the Department of Interior, the ports, they all have a piece of developing infrastructure. If you have a port saying this is the way we're going to develop infrastructure, for example, in Seattle, they increased the port number 5 so that they can have the mega ships come in there. But we don't have transportation infrastructure. It would take 76 miles of trucks in order to unload one of those ships. We need to have a cohesive plan that works together in order to do this effectively.
Thank you.
Okay, Candidate Ramos. The Employee Free Choice Act had majority support in both the 110th and 111th Congress, but failed to advance. Do you support union card check policies, and would you co-sponsor this bill if it were reintroduced?
Yes. I believe that unions were the backbone of building the middle class, and I think we need to get policies that reinforce the unions to bring the middle class back. We're getting squeezed out, and I would support that. I would be a co-sponsor.
Same question for Candidate Skold. The Employee Free Choice Act had majority support in the 110th and 111th Congresses, but it failed to advance. Do you support union card check policies? And would you co-sponsor this bill if it were reintroduced?
Yes, I would. If employees choose to support the ability to unionize and collectively bargain, then yes, that needs to happen. So yes, I do support that.
Okay, Candidate Skold. In 2014, the Commonwealth Fund looked at the healthcare for 12 similar industrialized nations and found that the U.S. was not only the most expensive, but that the U.S. was last or near last in measures of health access, efficiency, and equity. Some have pushed for expanding the Affordable Care Act, while others argue for universal health care, similar to what the other nations in the study have. Where do you stand?
Could you repeat the last part again, please?
Yes. Some have pushed for expanding the Affordable Care Act, while others argue for universal health care, similar to what the other nations in the study have. Where do you stand?
The Affordable Care Act, also known as the Obamacare, is a great place to start. We had to start someplace. It was a huge endeavor. And as it's been implemented, we have found unintended consequences. In addition, the Republican Party does not support it. And if they take the House and the Senate, if they take the majority and they get the presidency, then there's a strong chance Obamacare could be repealed. So if we look at expanding Medicare into a single-payer health care system, that would decrease costs. So you were talking about how other countries do not have the costs. That's what I was mentioning about my visit to Taiwan. The Ministry of Health let me know that they have excellent health care and lower costs because they have a single health care system. They don't have to double the cost. So in other words, if you have administrative costs from this insurance company, administrative costs from that insurance company, you're duplicating costs. If you have one single payer, you're not duplicating those costs. It's very streamlined, it's efficient, it's effective. And Medicare should also be allowed to negotiate drug prices. Right now they're not able to do that, and they need to be allowed to do so.
Candidate Ramos. In 2014, the Commonwealth Fund looked at the health care for 12 similar industrialized nations and found that the U.S. was not only the most expensive, but that the U.S. was last or near last in measures of health access, efficiency, and equity. Some have pushed for expanding the Affordable Care Act, while others argue for universal health care similar to what the other nations in the study have. Where do you stand?
The incumbent has voted over 60 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Repealing is not the answer. We got to look at ways to fix it. I like the single-payer system. I've been learning more about it, but I cannot promise to deliver something in the next 2 years. So what I'm going to work on is fixing what we can with the Affordable Care Act, starting with a billing system. It's very inefficient, and we can save cost to bring it back into actually paying for medical services. We also have to look at the actual healthcare costs, not just with the Affordable Care Act, but the emergency cost. I mean, you have, a homeless population that needs the emergency care, which we all pay for. We got to look at ways to helping the system, besides, the billing or anything else, just that. But going back to what is costing all this healthcare rise, the cost to rise so fast. And we got to address it not just by looking at, part of the Affordable Care Act, but looking at everything else that's making all those expenses go up.